discuss the Nigel Farage side of things now and where this is going for Western society as a whole. Brendan O'Neill is chief political writer at the UK website called Spiked. Brendan, thank you for joining me. It's disturbing that a person can be debanked and effectively shut out of the modern economy for having political beliefs that are different to someone in the ESG department of a bank. Now, Dame Alison Rose, the Coutts CEO, has had to backtrack, but that's not really the point. There was a culture in this bank where this seemed like a prudent thing to do. What does this tell us about the impact of ESG across the financial services industry?
I think it tells us a great deal, and we should be worried about all of it. I think let's be clear about what Coutts did to Nigel Farage. It was an outrageous act of corporate tyranny. They used their corporate power to punish one of their clients, one of their customers, simply for supposedly having the wrong views, having the wrong views on Brexit, on Trump, on net zero, for being friends with Novak Djokovic. That was another reason they listed in their sinister dossier that they drew up on him. And for questioning the idea of the trans ideology and so on. So basically, they found him guilty of wrongthink in this strange dossier that they drew up for their reputation committee. And then they said, well, let's find a way to kick him out of the bank. This was woke capitalism, as some people are referring to it, where companies are increasingly throwing their political weight around and punishing customers and clients for not having the same views as them. So we should all be worried about this unaccountable unilateral power that they are taking upon themselves.
You've mentioned this dossier compiled 40 pages long of information about Mr. Farage, including his political positions, his social media activity, who his friends were, who he tweeted, and used that as the basis for making its decision to debank him. Now, in Australia, we have union and Labor-aligned industry super funds as major bank shareholders, and they drive a lot of the push for politics in the corporate world, whether it's The Voice or gender issues or ESG notions more generally. But where this stuff doesn't add to the bottom line in what you've called woke capitalism, and surely turning away customers based on their politics falls in that category, doesn't it breach the duties of directors to keep doing this kind of thing?
Absolutely. I think it's completely unacceptable for companies and corporations and banks to behave in this way. And government, I think, has to get a handle on this pretty soon. You know, it's not only banks. We've also seen corporations like PayPal temporarily freezing the accounts of the Free Speech Union here in the UK, because apparently standing up for freedom of speech is a controversial thing to do. We've seen people who've been critical of COVID authoritarianism having their funds seized or frozen. That happened to the Canadian truckers movement last year. They were not given the funds that they had raised because the corporation that helped people to donate to them thought that they were an unworthy cause. And of course, we've seen the social media giants, the unaccountable billionaires of Silicon Valley, banning people from social media for referring to a biological male as he, or for saying something else that they consider to be unwoke and unacceptable. So across the board, we're seeing companies really go beyond their remit and they're now acting in a very political, moralistic, witch-hunting fashion. And I do think it's the role of government to step in at times like this and say, look, I'm sorry, we might believe in private property and the free market and free trade and so on, but there are certain things that a company and a bank should not be allowed to do. And one of those, I think, is to punish citizens of a democracy simply for having certain political views.
Yeah, it's a good point. The regulatory regime for banks in Australia is really complex, and along with quite high capital requirements, it operates as a barrier to new entrants coming into the market. So if the sector goes woke with outcomes like those that have been experienced by the people you've described, it's not a simple thing for a new competitor to join the market offering a non-woke alternative. Do you see a need for there to be reform either to the rules for existing banks to prevent them from engaging in this kind of discrimination, or to make competition from new entrants to the market more of a reality so that the market can more healthily do its thing and make sure people have somewhere to go if they're copying this kind of behaviour?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to see a combination of those two things. And we saw a similar situation when people were being banned from Twitter and Facebook. Even Donald Trump, who at the time was the sitting president of the United States, who'd been voted into power by 64 million people, he was banned from Twitter, banned from Facebook, banned across social media. It was an extraordinarily illiberal, undemocratic, authoritarian decision taken by Silicon Valley. And there was nowhere else for people like Trump and other people to go. There was no other social media outlet that was more free, more liberal, and it made it very difficult for people who want to express themselves in the modern town square, which is essentially what social media is. We now have a similar situation with banks where there's very little choice for people. So I would like to see a shake-up, a bit more competition so people have more choice, and restrictions on banks from behaving in a politically vindictive way.
Brendan O'Neill, thank you very much for your time and expertise.